1 Corinthians 14, "The things which I write to you are the commandments of the Lord." 1 Corinthians 14 continues the discourse on spiritual gifts, specifically focusing on the gifts of prophecy and speaking in tongues. Paul provides guidelines for their use in worship, emphasizing the goal of building up the church. Exegesis by sections and verses. Verses 1 to 5. The value of prophecy over speaking in tongues. Paul begins by encouraging the Corinthians to pursue love and to earnestly desire spiritual gifts, especially prophecy. He contrasts the gifts of speaking in tongues with prophecy, arguing that unless someone interprets, speaking in tongues only edifies the speaker, whereas prophecy edifies the whole church. Verses 6 to 12. The need for interpretation of tongues. Paul continues his argument by stating that speaking in tongues without interpretation is unfruitful. It is like playing a musical instrument without distinct notes, or speaking in the language of a foreign nation. The emphasis is on clarity of communication for mutual understanding and edification. Verses 13 to 19. Paul's personal practice. Paul says those who speak in tongues should pray for the interpretation, so that the church may be built up. He shares his own practice, saying that he speaks in tongues when he is alone, but in the church he would rather speak 5 words with his mind, to instruct others, than 10,000 words in a tongue. Verses 20 to 25. The purpose of tongues and prophecy. Paul encourages the Corinthians to not be children in their thinking, and explains the purpose of tongues and prophecy. Tongues serve as a sign for unbelievers, while prophecy is for believers. However, if an unbeliever or outsider enters the assembly when everybody is prophesying, they are convicted by all and called to account, and the secrets of their hearts are disclosed. Verses 26 to 33, Paul addresses tongues and prophecy. If anyone speaks in a tongue, it should be by 2 or at most 3, and each in turn, and someone must interpret. If there is no one to interpret, the speaker should keep silent in church and speak to himself and God. Prophets should also speak one by one, so that all may learn and be encouraged. Verses 34 to 35. Paul addresses the role of women in the church gathering. Paul says, "Let your women keep silent in the churches, for they are not permitted to speak, but they are to be submissive, as the law also says. And if they want to learn something, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is shameful for women to speak in church." In verses 36 to 38, Paul addresses the authority of his letters. Paul says, "Or did the word of God come originally from you? Or was it you only that it reached? If anyone thinks himself to be a prophet or spiritual, let him acknowledge that the things which I write to you are the commandments of the Lord. But if anyone is ignorant, let him be ignorant." Paul concludes the chapter by insisting that all things should be done decently and in order. Overall summary. 1 Corinthians 14 underscores the importance of edification and orderly gatherings in the church. The Apostle Paul contrasts the use of the gifts of tongues and prophecy in the public gathering, emphasizing the superiority of prophecy in edifying the church. While not devaluing the gift of tongues, Paul stresses the necessity of interpretation for mutual understanding and edification. The chapter also provides guidelines to maintain order and decency in the church's gatherings.